Did you know there's only been 14 times in NFL history where a player has eclipsed 17 or more receiving touchdowns in a single season? 10 different receivers and 1 tight end made this list today, and we're breaking down all of those years and what made all of these players so special. Starting it off, we have Don Hutson, who became the first player to ever have 17 receiving touchdowns in a single season. He achieved this in the 1942 season as a member of the Packers. Back in this era, a lot of players were used to playing on both sides of the ball, and Hutson possessed a level of versatility that was very impressive. He not only played wide receiver, but also played defensive end and defensive back. Hutson got his 1942 campaign started off on the right foot in the Packers' Week 1 matchup against the Bears. While he only pulled in 7 passes, he picked up 143 yards and 2 touchdowns, averaging over 20 yards per reception. Despite the great showing from Hutson, the Packers still suffered a 16-point loss, 44-28. While this was a great individual game from Hutson, it was far from his strongest performance of that season. That game arguably came in week number 8 when the Packers took on the Cardinals. On only 5 catches, he picked up 207 yards and 3 touchdowns. This is amazing efficiency from Hutson, and his hat trick was a huge part in the Packers' dominant 55-24 win. By the time the regular season ended, Hutson had 2 games with 3 receiving touchdowns, 6 games with 2 or more receiving touchdowns, and scored at least 1 receiving touchdown in 9 regular season games. He was by far the most elite wide receiver that the league had to offer that year, finishing the year with 74 catches for 1,211 yards and 17 touchdowns, leading the league in all 3 statistical categories. Along with this, he also led the league with the longest reception of the year with 73 yards, led in yards per touch with 15.8, yards from scrimmage with 1,215, and averaged the most receiving yards per game with 110.1. This earned him a spot in the Pro Bowl on the All-Pro First Team, and it made him the first player in history to record 17 receiving touchdowns in a single season. To make this even more impressive, Hutson achieved all of this in only an 11-game regular season. Pretty crazy to think what he could have achieved in a modern-day 17-game year. 9 years later, Elroy Hirsch became the second player in league history to go for 17 receiving touchdowns in a season. Similar to Don Hutson, Hirsch also played all over the field on both sides of the ball. On offense, he spent time at running back and wide receiver while also playing defensive end the other way down the field. The 1951 season, he dominated the wide receiver position, putting up numbers that none of his league mates could even come close to touching. His best game of the season came in the season opener when Hirsch and the Rams took on the New York Yanks, not the New York Yankees. Now, the Yanks had no answer for Hirsch in this game, and in only 9 receptions, he picked up 173 yards and scored 4 touchdowns. These 4 scores played a huge role in the Rams stomping the Yanks, winning by a final score of 54-14. While this was the only 4-touchdown game of the season for Hirsch, he ended the regular season with 2 games of 3 or more receiving touchdowns, 3 games of 2 or more, and scored at least 1 time in 11 games. Hirsch completely dominated every single metric for wide receivers this season, finishing with 66 receptions for 1,495 yards and 17 touchdowns, averaging 22.7 yards per catch and 124.6 receiving yards per game. Hirsch led the league in each and every one of these metrics, and to put the cherry on top, the Rams also won the championship that season against the Browns, and Hirsch even had the longest reception of the year at 91 yards. These insane numbers gave him a well-earned spot in the Pro Bowl and on the All-Pro First Team. Doing all of this in only a 12-game regular season makes these numbers all the more impressive and also speaks to the level of dominance that Hirsch possessed in his prime. 1 decade later, Bill Groman became the 3rd member of the 17-plus receiving touchdown club. Similar to both Hutson and Hirsch, he also played both sides of the ball during his time in the league, playing wide receiver on offense and left end on defense. He had his historic year in 1961 as a member of the Houston Oilers. His year got off to a hot start when the Oilers took on the Raiders, and while Groman only saw 4 receptions in that game, he made the most of them, picking up 67 yards and scoring 2 times. Houston ensured that this was not going to be a close game, and by the final whistle, they held an insane 55-0 lead. While a wide receiver can't ask for much more than opening up their season with a 2-score game, this was far from the peak of Groman's 1961 campaign. His strongest showing came in Week 11 when the Oilers took on the New York Titans. Off only 5 receptions, Groman was once again able to make some magic with his limited opportunities, picking up 152 yards and 3 touchdowns, averaging 30.4 yards per reception. His hat trick played a big role in Houston's blowout 49-13 win over the Titans, but I can't leave out Billy Cannon, who also added on 3 touchdowns of his own on that day. Despite this being the only 3-touchdown game for Groman of that season, he had 2 or more scores in 6 games and scored at least once in 10 games. Groman finished the regular season with 50 receptions for 1,175 yards and 17 touchdowns, averaging 23.5 yards per reception and a touchdown every 2.9 catches. He led the league in both yards per reception and receiving touchdowns. This also earned him a spot on the All-Pro first team, but shockingly, he lost out on a Pro Bowl selection. Once again, just like the past couple of players, this season was a bit shorter than we see today. Groman did all of this in only 14 games, making these numbers even more impressive. It took over 2 decades before another wide receiver eclipsed the 17 receiving touchdown mark, but Mark Clayton did so in the 1984 season as a member of the Dolphins. Interestingly, the Dolphins picked up Clayton in the 8th round of the 1983 NFL draft, and he was coming off a rookie season in which he only saw 6 receptions. Despite this, he carved out a massive role for himself in Miami's pass-heavy offense. In the team's opening matchup against the Redskins, he only saw 3 receptions, but was able to pick up 31 yards and a touchdown. The Dolphins came out comfortably on top in this one by a final score of 35-17. This was a decent performance, but he saved his grand finale for the final week of the regular season. Once again, Clayton did not see much action in terms of receptions, only pulling in 4 passes. However, he did make the most of these plays, picking up 150 yards, averaging 37.5 yards per catch, and scoring 3 touchdowns, scoring on 75% of the passes that he caught. Dolphins needed everything that they got out of Clayton in this matchup, as they narrowly escaped with a 7-point win, 28-21, despite the hat trick from their wide receiver. While this was the only game where Clayton scored 3 touchdowns, he scored multiple receiving touchdowns in 4 games and scored at least once in 13. He definitely put the league on notice this year and made every GM that passed on him time and time again in that 1983 draft regret it. He finished the regular season with 73 receptions for 1,389 yards and 18 touchdowns, leading the league in receiving touchdowns. Along with this, he set the record for most receiving touchdowns in a single season at that point in time. This earned him a spot in the Pro Bowl and on the All-Pro first team, but this, of course, would not be possible without Dan Marino's amazing season, leading the Dolphins to a 14-2 regular season record, also throwing for a league-leading 5,084 yards and 48 touchdowns. You guys know it wouldn't be a list about wide receiver achievements without Jerry Rice. Rice is widely considered to be the GOAT at the position, and for good reason. It's very difficult to argue with his longevity and seasons like 1987 that make him the undisputed greatest of all time at the wide receiver position. It only took 3 years before Rice not only joined the 17-plus touchdown club, but also took the record for most receiving touchdowns in a single season. He started his 1987 campaign off with a dominant showing against the Steelers, in which he posted 8 receptions for 106 yards and a touchdown. Despite this solid game from Rice, the Niners were easily still beaten by a final score of 30-17. However, after a 2-touchdown game against the Bengals, his momentum came to a screeching halt when the players went on strike to protest against team owners for better pay and freedom to move teams if they so desired. This caused Rice to miss 4 games, but he went on an elite tear once all of the league's best players made a return, with his strongest performance coming in week number 12 when the Niners took on the Browns. Rice followed up his 3-touchdown performance the previous week with yet another hat trick on only 7 catches, picking up 126 yards along the way. He played a huge role in San Francisco's 38-24 win that day, with Rice almost outscoring the opposing team on his own. Over the regular season, he had 3 games where he scored 3 receiving touchdowns, 7 games of multiple receiving touchdowns, and caught at least 1 touchdown in all 12 games that he played in that year, which was unbelievable. When the regular season was all said and done, Rice totaled 65 catches for 1,078 yards and 22 touchdowns, meaning he scored on average once every 3 times that he caught the ball. He led the league in both receiving touchdowns and also receiving yards per game with 89.8. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl on the All-Pro first team, won him the Offensive Player Player of the Year award, and he came in second place in MVP voting behind only John Elway. The strike never happened and Rice kept up that unbelievable pace. He could have put up close to 30 touchdowns probably. And although one player we're going to mention later on holds the record for most touchdowns in a single season, he also had 4 extra games to do so. It didn't take long for Rice to hit the 17 receiving touchdown mark yet again, doing so 2 years later in the 1989 season. Rice had an elite showing in the opening game of that year when the Niners took on the Colts, where he went for 163 yards and a touchdown on 6 catches. This touchdown ended up being a much needed one also, with the Niners narrowly coming out on top by a final score of 30-24. While this was of course an elite showing, he had more of the same in store for his week 3 matchup against the Eagles. Rice once again pulled in 6 passes, this time going for 164 yards and 2 touchdowns. Similar to the Niners game against the Colts, they couldn't have won this game without Rice's scoring, coming out on top by a final score of 38-28. Rice finished the regular season with 4 games of 2 receiving touchdowns and scored at least 1 time in 13 games. In the 16 games that he appeared in this year, he totaled 82 receptions for 1,483 yards and 17 touchdowns, leading the league in both receiving yards and receiving touchdowns. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl on the All-Pro First Team, and he came in second place in Offensive Player of the Year voting behind only his quarterback Joe Montana, ending as a Super Bowl champion and being named MVP for the biggest game of the year. Half a decade later, another player added their name to this prestigious touchdown club, that player being Sterling Sharpe. While many are much more familiar with Sterling's brother, former Broncos tight end Shannon Sharpe, it can be argued that Sterling had just as much talent as his younger brother. Sharpe's 1994 campaign was arguably the best of his career and also his last in the league. While he didn't dominate his peers at the wide receiver position like he did in 1992 when he led the league in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns, he did set a record high in receiving touchdowns in 1994. He started off the season with a solid 7 reception, 53-yard, and 1 touchdown performance when his Packers took on the Vikings. This was a defensive battle with the Packers coming out on top by a final score of 16-10. Sharpe's best performance of that season came in Week 13 when Green Bay took on the Cowboys. Sharpe could not be stopped in this matchup, pulling in 9 receptions for 122 yards and a ridiculous 4 touchdowns. Despite scoring all 4 touchdowns that the Packers saw in this matchup, Sharpe and Green Bay were still sent home with a 42-31 loss. Despite this being his only 4 touchdown game of that year, he had 2 games in which he scored 3 or more receiving touchdowns, 4 in which he scored multiple receiving touchdowns, and scored at least once in 11 games. He finished the regular season with 94 receptions for 1,119 yards and 18 touchdowns. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl. Shockingly, this was also the final year of his career, as it was discovered in the offseason leading up to the 1995 season that he had to get a neck fusion of his top 2 vertebrae, forcing him to undergo surgery that put an end to his career. Had that not occurred, he might have gone down as one of the greatest wide receivers to ever play the game. Just 1 year following Sterling Sharpe's historic season, Cris Carter became one of 2 wide receivers to hit the 17 receiving touchdown mark in that 1995 season. In Minnesota's Week 1 matchup against the Bears, Chicago did their best to hold both Carter and the Vikings offense in check, with their top wide receiver picking up 83 yards on 5 catches, and Minnesota struggling offensively, putting up only 14 points. They were beaten by a final score of 31-14. However, this game from Carter was not a common trend in the 1995 season. He had arguably his strongest showing of the year in Week 11 when the Vikings took on the Cardinals. Carter was heavily targeted in that matchup, pulling in 12 passes for 157 yards and 2 touchdowns. Minnesota desperately needed both of these scores, narrowly winning that game by a final score of 30-24. Over the course of the regular season, Carter scored multiple receiving touchdowns in 7 games and scored at least once in 10 games. Over the 16 games that he played in during the regular season, a 30-year-old Carter accumulated 122 catches for 1,371 yards and 17 touchdowns, tying the league lead for receiving touchdowns. touchdowns. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl and on the All-Pro second team. As we mentioned earlier, Carter was not the only wide receiver to go for 17 receiving touchdowns that year. Carl Pickens joined him in becoming members of the exclusive club in that 1995 season. This was by far the best year of Pickens' career, but things didn't start off that way. In the Bengals season opener against the Colts, Pickens had a quiet 5 catches for 39 yards and a touchdown. Fortunately, this touchdown was exactly what the Bengals needed, with them coming out on top by a final score of 24-21. Pickens had much more in the tank though, and he put on his best performance of that year in week number 5 when Cincinnati took on the Dolphins. He showed out in this matchup, pulling in 9 receptions for 117 yards and 3 touchdowns. Despite scoring all 3 of the Bengals touchdowns in that game, Pickens was still sent home with a loss, with Cincinnati barely losing by a final score of 26-23. While this was the only 3 touchdown receiving performance for him in 1995, he posted 3 games in which he pulled in 2 or more touchdowns and scored at least once in 13 games. After putting together a strong 16-game regular season, Pickens accumulated 99 catches for 1,234 yards and 17 touchdowns, tying for the league lead in receiving touchdowns. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl and on the All-Pro second team. While Pickens was unable to come close to these numbers again in his career, he still cemented his name in the history books because of that historic season. Just 3 years later, Randy Moss had arguably the greatest rookie season from a wide receiver of all time. Many didn't know what to think of Moss coming into the league, as he hadn't played much NFL caliber talent during his time at Marshall. Pairing this with some off-field issues that he had in his past, and he slid all the way to the 21st overall pick despite being a generational talent. As a member of the Vikings, he was mentored by Hall of Famer Chris Carter, who had already posted a 17 touchdown season earlier in his career. However, in only his rookie season, Moss would match his mentor's career high. In his NFL debut, he put up a very impressive 95 yards and 2 touchdowns on only 4 catches. His 2 scores that day played a massive role in Minnesota's dominant 31-7 win over the Bucs. His best performance came in his notorious Thanksgiving Day game against the Cowboys. Moss had an almost perfect game, ending the matchup with 163 yards and 3 touchdowns on only 3 catches, scoring every single time that he touched the ball. Once again, Moss's ability to find the end zone was a deciding factor in the Vikings coming out on top by a final score of 46-36. This was one of 2 3 touchdown games for Moss that year as a rookie. Along with this, he scored multiple times in 4 games and had at least 1 receiving touchdown in 11 games. Moss finished his rookie campaign with 69 catches for 1,313 yards and 17 touchdowns, leading the league in receiving touchdowns. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl, on the All-Pro first team, and he won the Offensive Rookie of the Year award. Along with this, he finished in 3rd place in both the Offensive Player of the Year and MVP voting, losing out to both his quarterback Randall Cunningham and Terrell Davis for both awards. Moss and Cunningham were clicking on all cylinders that season though, finishing the regular season 15-1 and making it all the way to the NFC Championship game before losing to the Falcons by just 3 points. Moss did his thing in this game though, coming away with 6 catches for 75 yards and a touchdown, but unfortunately it was not quite enough for the win. I hope you guys aren't sick of hearing about Randy Moss just yet, because he occupies the next 2 spots on this list as well. The next time he joined the 17 touchdown club was in 2003, once again as a member of the Vikings. This time, instead of Randall Cunningham throwing him the ball, Dante Culpepper decided to join in the festivities with Moss. The two were on fire out of the gates in their week 1 matchup against the Packers, where they linked up for 9 receptions, 150 yards, and a touchdown, along with winning the game by 5 points, 30-25. Moss's best game of that season came in week number 4 when the Vikings took on the Niners. This time it was Gus Frerotte throwing to Moss, but it didn't matter who his quarterback was that season. In this game, he went for 8 catches, 172 yards, and 3 touchdowns in Minnesota's dominant 35-7 win. Although this was his only game recording 3 touchdowns that season, Moss finished 5 games with multiple touchdowns and scored at least 1 time in 11 games. Once the season came to an end, Moss racked up 111 receptions for 1,632 yards and a league-leading 17 touchdowns. He was also added to the Pro Bowl roster, along with being on the All-Pro first team. Who else would be the next player to eclipse the 17 receiving touchdown mark besides Randy Moss yet again? Moss achieved this feat for a 3rd time in his first year with the Patriots. Following 2 slower years with the Raiders following his departure from the Vikings, Moss was traded to New England for only a 4th-round draft pick. This paired him with a great quarterback in Tom Brady, and Brady made sure to make the most of his time with one of the most talented wide receivers that the game has ever seen. In his New England debut, Moss had an almost perfect game, catching all 9 of his targets and turning them into 183 yards and a touchdown. He played a huge role in the Patriots' dominant 38-14 win over the Jets that day. However, this was far from his best game of the season. That came in Week 11 when the Pats took on the Bills. Moss could not be stopped in that matchup, with Brady taking full advantage of the mismatches that he was creating. He pulled in 10 passes for 128 yards and a ridiculous 4 touchdowns. New England was running laps around Buffalo in this game and ended the game with a 56-10 lead. While this was the only 4-touchdown game from Moss that season, he scored 2 or more receiving touchdowns in 8 games and caught at least 1 in 13. Moss finished the regular season with 98 catches for 1,493 yards and 23 touchdowns. Not only did he lead the league in receiving touchdowns that year, but he also broke Jerry Rice's 1987 record for single-season receiving touchdowns, record that still stands to this day. This earned Moss a spot in the Pro Bowl on the All-Pro First Team, and he came in 2nd place in both the Offensive Player of the Year and Comeback Player of the Year voting, losing the Offensive Player of the Year award to his quarterback Tom Brady and the Comeback Player of the Year award to Dallas Cowboys left outside linebacker Greg Ellis. However, Moss's season was far from over at the end of the regular season. He played a huge role in the Patriots having a perfect record heading into the postseason. After a quiet 2 games in the postseason in which he combined for 2 catches for 32 yards, he had his best game of the entire playoffs in the Super Bowl. The first perfect season since the Dolphins in 1972 was on the line, and Moss did everything that he could, pulling in 5 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown. However, it was not enough, with the Giants coming out on top by a final score of 17-14, putting an end to what would have been the greatest season a team has ever had in NFL history. Despite this, the 23 touchdown season gives Moss a strong case for having one of, if not the best single season runs from a wide receiver. Now we're going to move on to another Patriots player and the only tight end to make an appearance on this list. It's none other than Rob Gronkowski. Just like Moss, Gronk had the privilege of playing with Brady, and the two had a next level connection. Their 2011 campaign started off hot against the Dolphins when Gronk caught 6 passes for 87 yards and a touchdown in their dominant 38-24 win. That was a great game, but it was kind of laughable in comparison to their Week 14 matchup against Washington. In that game, Gronk pulled in 6 passes for 160 yards and 2 touchdowns, contributing all he could in New England's 34-27 win. That performance from him was one of 7 multiple touchdown games that year and one of 10 where he had at least 1 score. At the end of that 2011 regular season, Gronk totaled 90 catches for 1,327 yards and a league-leading 17 touchdowns. He was added to the Pro Bowl roster along with being an All-Pro first-team selection. To add on to this great year, the Patriots made it all the way to the Super Bowl before once again losing to the Giants by a final score of 21-17. Gronk was held in check during that game, unfortunately, only pulling in 2 passes for 26 yards. It took nearly a decade before another player would join the ranks of the 17-plus touchdown club. However, this would end in 2020 when Davante Adams became the most recent player to join this list. He got his 2020 campaign off to a scorching hot start, making it clear that him and quarterback Aaron Rodgers were going to be an elite duo throughout that season. In Week 1, where the Packers took on the Vikings, Adams pulled in 14 passes for 156 yards and a pair of touchdowns, playing a massive role in the Packers' 43-34 shootout win. Unfortunately, his momentum was brought to a halt when he suffered a hamstring injury the following week against the Lions that not only kept him sidelined for the remainder of that game, but also forced him to miss the next 2 weeks. He did return from this injury better than ever though, and had an extremely strong second half of the year. His best game of that year touchdown wise came in Week 16 when the Packers took on the Titans. Adams absolutely torched the Titans for 11 catches that he turned into 142 yards and 3 touchdowns. Adams outscored the Titans all by himself in the Packers' dominant 40-14 blowout win. This was not the only game in which Adams went for 3 touchdowns either, going for another hat trick in week number 8 against the Vikings. Along Along with this, he posted 2 or more touchdowns in 5 games, while he scored at least 1 touchdown in 11. While he only played in 14 games, Adams still put up 115 catches for 1,374 yards and 18 touchdowns, with an average of 98.1 receiving yards per game, leading the league in both receiving touchdowns and receiving yards per game. This earned himself a spot in the Pro Bowl and on the All-Pro first team. Had Adams been able to play a full 16-game season, there's definitely a chance that at the very worst, he could have taken sole control of 3rd place in all-time single-season receiving touchdowns, and at best, he could have even broken or tied Moss's record for most receiving touchdowns in a season. With the immense amount of talent at the wide receiver position right now, paired with the league being more pass-heavy than ever, and the NFL expanding to a 17-game regular season, it's going to be very interesting to see who is the next player to join this list of 17-plus receiving touchdowns in a single season. I want to know in the comment section below, who do you guys think is going to be next to join this list? Also, hit that subscribe button for more videos just like this one and drop a thumbs up.